seemed to disappear during family gatherings. Small, seemingly innocent moments that he had once overlooked now felt charged with hidden meaning. By February 2014, Faisal's suspicions had grown too large to ignore. He began quietly monitoring Samira's movements, watching her closely without letting on that he was aware. He noticed how she would often leave the house under the pretense of running errands, how her phone seemed to be more closely guarded than before. There were moments when he would catch her speaking softly on the phone, abruptly ending the conversation when he entered the room. Faisal felt a deep sense of betrayal growing within him, but he remained silent, biding his time. He knew that he couldn't confront her without proof. His heart grew heavy with each passing day, torn between the love he had always held for his wife and the growing certainty that she was keeping a dark secret from him. The emotional distance between them had become unbearable. But still, Faisal waited, hoping against hope that he was wrong. It was in the middle of February 2014 that Faisal finally uncovered the truth. One evening, while Samira was out, he went through her phone. What he found shattered him. Messages exchanged between Samira and Amir, once hidden away, now lay bare before him. The words were unmistakable. There was no room for doubt. His wife and his father had been carrying on an affair behind his back for years. The realization hit him like a tidal wave, drowning him in a sea of anger and despair. Faisal sat in silence, the weight of his discovery pressing down on him. He felt as though the world had shifted beneath his feet, as though everything he had known about his life had been a lie. Yet even in his rage, he didn't confront Samira immediately. He waited, simmering in his anger, allowing the truth to settle within him. He would confront them, but he would do it on his own terms. The emotional connection that once held his marriage together was now severed, replaced by a dark, festering anger. Faisal knew that nothing would ever be the same again, but he remained silent, waiting for the moment when he could unleash the full weight of his fury on both Samira and Amir. What had once been a peaceful home was now a ticking time bomb, and it was only a matter of time before everything exploded. What would Faisal do with this knowledge? What drastic turn of events would unfold next? The tension within him grew unbearable, his thoughts consumed by the betrayal that had shattered his life. The emotional ties between him and his father, once strong, had now turned into a burning hatred, while the love he had for his wife had been replaced by bitterness. All that remained was the waiting, the calm before the storm. On the evening of March 6th, 2014, the quiet of Faisal and Samira's home was interrupted by an event that would change the course of their lives forever. Faisal, returning unexpectedly early from a business trip, stepped into the house just after sunset. The air inside felt thick with tension, but he had grown used to this feeling in recent months. His suspicions, long brewing, were always with him now, never allowing him to feel at ease in his own home. As he set down his briefcase, Faisal noticed the silence. The children were staying at his sister's house for the night, but the house wasn't entirely empty. He could hear muffled voices coming from the guest room, a room normally reserved for his father during visits. Faisal's heart began to race, the doubts that had plagued him for so long now boiling to the surface. He moved silently toward the door, listening as the soft voices became clearer. His mind raced with possibilities, but deep down, he already knew what he was about to discover. When he reached the door, it was slightly ajar. He peered inside, his breath catching in his throat as the scene unfolded before him. His wife, Samira, and his father, Amir, locked in an intimate embrace. Time seemed to stand still for a moment. Faisal's worst fears, the suspicions that had eaten away at him for months, were confirmed in the most devastating way possible. The betrayal of not just his wife, but his own father, cut through him like a knife. Faisal's body reacted before his mind could catch up. A wave of uncontrollable rage washed over him, and he burst through the door, confronting them. His voice, once calm and measured, was now filled with fury. The sight of Amir, the man who had raised him, entwined with his wife, was more than he could bear. His mind became a blur, consumed by thoughts of betrayal and humiliation. Samira recoiled in shock, her face pale, as she tried to explain, but her words were lost in the storm of Faisal's anger. The confrontation quickly escalated. Faisal's world had come crashing down, and there was no controlling the rage that had taken hold of him. His emotions, once bottled up, now spilled out in a torrent of violence. He reached for the nearest object, a decorative knife that had been hanging on the wall for years. Its presence, once a symbol of family heritage, now a weapon of destruction. Without thinking, Faisal lunged at Amir, stabbing him repeatedly. Each thrust of the knife was driven by the pain of betrayal, each strike a release of the pent-up anger that had been building for so long. Amir, once a figure of strength and authority in the family, crumpled to the floor under the force of his son's attack. Blood quickly pooled around him, staining the carpet beneath. His body, once full of life and power, now lay lifeless at his son's feet. The room, once a place of family gatherings, had become the scene of a brutal crime. Samira, frozen in shock, could only watch as her world fell apart. Her scream echoed through the house, but Faisal barely heard it. His mind was consumed by the enormity of what he had done. He turned to her, his anger still burning, but before he could act, the weight of his actions overwhelmed him. His body, exhausted by the violence and the emotions swirling within him, collapsed to the floor. The knife slipped from his hand, clattering onto the blood-soaked ground beside him. The aftermath was a blur. A neighbor, having heard the commotion, called the police, unaware of the tragedy unfolding inside. The police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow over the quiet street. They entered the house cautiously, unsure of what to expect. Inside, they found Faisal on the floor, covered in his father's blood, his face drained of emotion. Amir's lifeless body lay beside him, and Samira, still in shock, sat motionless in the corner of the room. On March 8th, Faisal was taken into custody. The news of the murder sent fear through the community. Faisal, once a respected businessman and family man, was now the subject of scandal and whispers. His father's murder, committed in a fit of rage, was the talk of the town. But the real scandal lay in the details of the affair that had led to it. As Faisal sat in his cell, awaiting the next steps in the investigation, Samira was left to face the consequences of her own actions. She was questioned by the authorities, her role in the affair now exposed for all to see. In the weeks that followed, the investigation unfolded in painstaking detail. The police pieced together the events leading up to the murder, interviewing family members, neighbors, and colleagues. By March 20th, the evidence against Faisal was overwhelming. and he was officially charged with the murder of his father. The weight of his actions hung heavily over him, but his anger had not entirely subsided. In his mind, the true blame lay with Samira and Amir, the people who had betrayed him in the most intimate way possible. As the case went to trial, the courtroom became a battleground of emotions. The details of the affair were laid bare for all to see, shocking the community and tarnishing the family's once respected reputation. Faisal, though guilty of murder, was seen as a man who had been pushed to his breaking point. His pleas for leniency under Sharia law were heard, and the court, recognizing the emotional torment that had driven him to commit the crime, showed him mercy. His sentence was reduced to 15 years in prison, a punishment that reflected both the gravity of the crime and the understanding of the pain that had led to it. But Samira's fate was far more severe. In the eyes of the court, she was the true cause of the tragedy. Her role in the affair, her betrayal of both her husband and the family, was seen as the root of the violence that had unfolded. Initially sentenced to death for her part in the scandal, Samira's life was spared only by Faisal's plea for mercy. Though he had every reason to hate her, he could not bring himself to condemn her to death. The court, moved by his plea, reduced her sentence to 10 years in prison. Despite this act of mercy, their marriage was irreparably broken. The bond they had once shared, fragile as it had been, was now completely shattered. Samira's reputation, once that of a dutiful wife and mother, was forever tarnished. The community, once supportive of the family, now turned its back on her, viewing her as the catalyst for the tragedy that had destroyed not just one life, but an entire family. The family, once a pillar of the community, was left in ruins. Amir's death, the affair, and the murder had torn them apart, leaving scars that would never heal. Faisal, though spared the death penalty, would live the rest of his life with the weight of his actions hanging over him. Samira, too, would carry the burden of her choices, locked away from the world, her children, and the life she had once known. In the end, the story of their lives became a cautionary tale, a warning of the destructive power of betrayal, desire, and unchecked rage. What had once been a family bound by tradition and respect was now nothing more than a memory, broken beyond repair. The tragedy that had unfolded on the evening of March 6, 2014, would haunt them for the rest of their days. By the end of 2015, Samira is left to reflect on the choices that led to the destruction of her family. The weight of her guilt is matched only by the isolation she now faces, as both her husband and father-in-law are gone. The marriage, once a bond forged in tradition, is now nothing but a memory, shattered by betrayal and bloodshed. What will become of Samira? Will she ever find redemption in the eyes of her community? Or is she forever marked by the sins of her past? Like the case where the Muslim wife's secret affair with her husband's cousin ended in murder. This case was marked by shame and regret. Don't forget to like our videos and subscribe as you go through our cases.